Imagine a world where the cure was often more terrifying than the disease. A time when the very act of saving a life could claim three more. This isn't a macabre fairy tale, but a chilling chapter from medical history, featuring a legendary surgeon and an operation so catastrophic it boasts a staggering 300% mortality rate. Step back with us into the grimy, blood-soaked operating theaters of the 19th century, where speed was a surgeon's greatest virtue, and one man's frantic haste led to an utterly unbelievable, tragic outcome. Prepare to meet Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End, and witness the operation that defied all odds, not by saving lives, but by claiming an impossible number. Our journey begins in an era utterly alien to modern sensibilities, the early to mid-19th century. Hospitals were not the sterile sanctuaries we know today, but often unsanitary, crowded, and terrifying places. The most profound difference? The absence of effective anesthesia. Operations were performed on fully conscious patients, their screams echoing through the wards. Pain was not mitigated, it was endured. Surgeons were not judged by their precision alone, but by their incredible speed, for every agonizing second prolonged the patient's suffering and increased the risk of shock. This was a brutal ballet of human endurance and surgical efficiency. Into this harrowing world stepped Robert Liston, a towering Scotsman with a formidable reputation. Born in 1794, Liston was a brilliant, albeit notoriously gruff surgeon. He was known for his incredible dexterity and his almost theatrical approach to surgery. His peers called him the fastest knife in the West End. Liston could amputate a leg in under 3 minutes, remove a bladder stone in under 1, and even extract a tonsil in seconds. Such speed, while seemingly barbaric today, was considered a mark of supreme skill, minimizing both the patient's agony and the time exposed to infection. He was a force of nature, driven by an unwavering belief in his own abilities. Liston's operations were not private affairs. They were public spectacles, performed in amphitheater-style operating theaters, often before an audience of medical students, fellow surgeons, and even curious onlookers. Imagine the scene: a packed room, gasps and murmurs from a gallery, the air thick with anticipation, fear, and the inevitable stench of blood and sweat. There was no sterile environment. Surgeons often operated in their street clothes, instruments were rarely cleaned thoroughly, and hands were washed infrequently, if at all. It was a raw, visceral experience where life and death hung by a thread, often decided in a matter of terrifying, lightning-fast minutes. The particular case that would etch Liston's name into medical infamy involved a patient suffering from a severely diseased leg. In the 19th century, conditions like advanced gangrene, bone infections, osteomyelitis, or severe trauma often left amputation as the only recourse. Without antibiotics, such infections were almost always fatal if left unchecked. The patient, likely racked with pain and facing certain death, would have consented to the brutal procedure out of sheer desperation. It was a common, yet always life-threatening, operation demanding the utmost skill and, crucially, speed from the surgeon. Before the operation began, Liston would survey his tools, an array of gleaming but unsterilized knives, saws, and forceps. These instruments, passed down through generations, were often made of steel, meticulously sharpened, and designed for efficient, swift action. There were no scalpels as we know them. Instead, large, heavy knives were used for initial incisions, followed by bone saws. An assistant would be tasked with holding the limb steady, while another prepared bandages and rudimentary dressings. The air would be thick with anticipation, the metallic glint of instruments reflecting the sparse light, as the stage was set for a life-or-death drama. With the patient secured, often by several strong assistants, Liston began. The speed was legendary. With a single, fluid motion, the large amputation knife would slice through skin and muscle. Accounts describe him holding the knife in his mouth to free his hands for other tasks, a chilling testament to his self-assurance and the era's lack of concern for hygiene. The operation was a blur of movement, Liston's voice barking orders, the patient's screams almost immediately erupting, quickly followed by the dull thud of the bone saw. It was a race against the clock, against pain, and against the swift onset of shock. The patient, enduring unimaginable agony, was the primary focus of Liston's lightning-fast procedure. While the amputation itself might have been technically successful, the post-operative period was a gauntlet of lethal challenges. Shock, hemorrhage, and above all, infection were almost inevitable. Without sterile techniques or antibiotics, even a perfectly executed surgery was often a death sentence. In this particular case, the patient, despite surviving the immediate trauma of the amputation, succumbed a few days later to what was then known as hospital gangrene, a virulent infection that swept through unhygienic wards, a common and deadly aftermath of almost any invasive procedure. In Liston's frantic haste to complete the amputation, tragedy struck again. While wielding his knife with blistering speed, he inadvertently severed the fingers of his young, eager assistant. The assistant, standing close to hold the patient's limbs steady, was a casualty of the surgeon's reckless efficiency. In the chaos of the operating theater, with the patient screaming and blood flowing, such an injury might have been dismissed as an unfortunate occupational hazard. Like the patient, the assistant later succumbed to a virulent infection that spread from a wound. In a world without antisepsis, even a minor cut could become a gateway for deadly bacteria, turning a simple injury into a fatal one. But the horror wasn't over. In yet another instance of Liston's wild, unchecked speed, his knife didn't just find the patient and the assistant. During a particularly swift maneuver, perhaps while sawing through bone, Liston's blade reportedly sliced through the coattails of a distinguished elderly spectator standing in the front row, observing the procedure intently. The spectator, startled but seemingly unharmed by the superficial cut to his clothing, collapsed shortly after the operation, not from physical injury, but from sheer terror and shock. He died within days, his heart unable to withstand the trauma and the unspeakable horror he had just witnessed. An extraordinary and unlikely third casualty. Thus, the impossible became a gruesome reality. One operation, intended to save a single life, resulted in the death of 3 people: the patient, the assistant, and the spectator. A 100% mortality rate for the patient, another 100% for the assistant, and a further 100% for the terrified onlooker. This truly unique and ghastly tally adds up to an astonishing 300% mortality rate from a single surgical procedure. It stands as a chilling testament to the brutal, unpredictable, and often fatal nature of 19th century medicine, a stark reminder of how perilously close life and death often stood, even in the hands of the most skilled practitioners. Despite this infamous incident, Robert Liston's place in medical history is complex and contradictory. He was more than just a fast, reckless surgeon. Liston was a brilliant anatomist and a true pioneer. Crucially, he was the first surgeon in Europe to perform a major operation using modern anesthesia, ether, in 1846, just a year before his death. This act alone revolutionized surgery, transforming it from a barbaric race against pain into a controlled, relatively comfortable procedure. His contributions to surgical technique and education are undeniable, even if his earlier career was marred by incidents like the 300% mortality operation, a dark reflection of his era. The horrors of 19th century surgery, epitomized by Liston's 300% mortality operation, eventually gave way to radical advancements. The introduction of anesthesia meant surgeons no longer had a rush, allowing for greater precision. Even more transformative was the work of Joseph Lister, who, inspired by Louis Pasteur's germ theory, pioneered antiseptic surgery in the late 1860s. Washing hands, sterilizing instruments, and using carbolic acid to kill germs drastically reduced post-operative infections. These two breakthroughs, anesthesia and antisepsis, collectively transformed surgery from a brutal, often fatal gamble into a life-saving science, consigning the gruesome spectacles of Liston's era to history. The story of Robert Liston and his operation with an impossible 300% mortality rate is more than just a morbid curiosity. It's a powerful, albeit gruesome, window into the brutal realities of medicine less than 2 centuries ago. It reminds us of the immense suffering endured, the courage of patients, and the desperate struggle of surgeons grappling with forces they barely understood. While Liston's methods were, by today's standards, terrifyingly crude, he was a product of his time and ultimately a part of the evolutionary path that led to modern, humane, and incredibly effective surgery. It's a stark illustration of how far we've come, and a testament to the relentless human pursuit of healing, no matter the cost.